Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to another day in the life of an entrepreneur. And I am your host, Rose, and I'm the founder of McDonald Bookkeeping. And we are having a great show today because normally, as you know, we do our shows every Saturday. But lately, we've had shows pop up, a few guests that have been during the weekday, and that is because, you know, there are some really great guests that we have, and we're trying not to spread them out too far on Saturday, so we've been able to fit them in on a weekday. So for all of our listeners who have been following us on all the different platforms we're on, podcast platform, thank you for being loyal followers, loyal subscribers. The comments that you have, you know, our engagement is growing. So that tells me that you guys really enjoy the guests that we bring on our show. So if you are unfamiliar with our show, what we do is we bring in great guests that can help entrepreneurs, people, they'll share their journey in their entrepreneurship from nonprofits, business owners, attorneys. We have some celebrities. So we really hope that you guys are getting some really great use out of our show and resources and connect with them. So as you see, I'm here by myself today. My co-host hopefully will be popping on tomorrow, but as you know, we are both business owners, so we run a business too, so she has some clients today. So I am going to introduce our guest today, which I am so thankful to have him on our show, and especially in a time that we are in today. I think he is a great asset to the show and what he can offer to our listeners. Of course, so this is Elliott Robinson Jr., who is the founder of Creative Tension that provides a voice to the people in our forgotten Black history. So what I'm going to do is pop him on the show right now. And I hope you guys enjoy this segment. You're going to enjoy this segment. This is going to be a great segment. So let's get it started and pop him on the stream right now. Hi, welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you for having me. Glad to be on.
So if you could, like, you know, tell our listeners just a little bit about your story, about yourself, you know, and so they'll get familiar before we kind of get into the questionnaire part of it. I think he's a little frozen. So hold on, guys. He should get a better connection pretty soon. So if you hear me, Elliott, you froze up just a bit. And we have Elliott Robinson Jr., founder of CreativeTensions.org, that provides a voice to the people in our forgotten Black history. Great. He's going to share some his experiences and everything from the Jim Crow era. So if you have some questions or anything, you can definitely ask and jump in, and we can put your questions on the screen. Yay, you're back. Okay, there you go. Thank you guys for hanging in there. He got locked up for just a little bit. Can you hear me, Elliott? Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Perfect.
I can now, yeah.
Thanks for hanging in there, guys. Okay, so Elliott's going to just give you a little bit of background about himself before we jump into the show.
Sure. So I'm Elliott Robinson. I'm so glad to be on the show with you this afternoon. My background is actually somewhat circuitous, I guess. I initially went to law school at Howard University. Before that, I got my BA in marketing, business administration from the State University of New York at New Paltz. And after I did practice law, did IP, copyrights and trademarks, I did some contract law, I did some real estate. And so I did practice law for a while. And it's interesting, during my time in law school is actually when the bug was planted for the work that I'm doing now. I lived in Washington, D.C., and I had an uncle who also lived in D.C. Yeah.
Well, not Redskins anymore, I guess.
The team without a name.
Yes.
Yeah, team without a name. And so my uncle and I would ride from DC back to New York. And during our rides, we would have conversations. And it was interesting. One time we started talking about him growing up, and he grew up in Sumter, South Carolina with my dad, my grandmother, and my aunt and uncle. And my dad would talk a little bit about growing up in Sumter, but nothing too much other than just the happy, happy, joy, joy type stories. And one day my uncle Ike, who has since passed, started talking about what it was like to grow up in Sumter. And his stories weren't happy, happy, joy, joy. He would tell stories about people who literally would be run out of town. And so they would be in town one day, and then maybe they got into an altercation with someone. Maybe they got into a fight. Maybe they were accused of dating, because they're African American. They were dating a white girl. The next thing you know, they're having to be rushed out of town. And then also just stories of people disappearing. And so I remember one of our trips, he's sharing with me these stories, and I'm looking at him saying, "This can't be true. I think you're making this up," because like my dad never told me these stories. We talked, and he never shared them. So I asked my dad, "Are these stories true?" And he kind of, "Well, you know, it was a different time, Sumter, blah, blah, blah." Then eventually admitted, yes, they're true. And I'm blown away, because I was a Black Studies minor in undergrad. And so I felt like, you know, I know a little something. I'm 3 credits short of getting a Black Studies major. I felt like I knew a little Black history. But these types of stories I never heard before. More of the terror side of Jim Crow. You know, we talk about the water coolers, we talk about the marches, but never as much about what day-to-day life was like for African Americans growing up during Jim Crow. And so at that point, the seed was planted. And initially, this is in now the 90s, like the mid-90s. The initial seed was planted to maybe do a documentary. You know, there weren't podcasts. People weren't really weren't into that NPR type of radio story format just yet. And so I was like, oh, you know, my uncle will be great. He's funny. He tells great stories. And I've, you know, I lollygagged on it. And then the next thing you know, he passed. And when he passed away, I was like, oh, man, you know, all his stories passed away, you know, passed with him. And it really made me think about the fact that, wow, you know, every day, someone from that generation, their stories are passing with them. But so fast forward, you know, I still lollygagged on it. I ended up going to seminary at Emory. And so at the Candler School of Theology, and one of the courses I had was a course called Cultural Memory, where we talked about what it means for a group or an entity to remember aspects of that particular community. And one of our projects was to interview someone, and then in that interview, be able to present what it was about that particular person's life. And so I picked a gentleman from the church that I was attending, Mr. Cromer, and he talked about his life growing up, surprisingly enough, in South Carolina. And his story, he grew up in a different part of South Carolina. His stories were so similar to the stories that my uncle and my father told me that it just blew me away. You know, just like the racial etiquette of having to step off the sidewalk. You know, you couldn't stand around and just exist. Like, you had to be going somewhere. And if you weren't going somewhere, they would say you were loitering, and Black people weren't allowed to loiter. So that's when the idea of, okay, I need to do more. I need to do a podcast kind of documenting this. And initially it was going to be about Dr. King. Because that was really the desire was, okay, you know, I want to do Dr. King because, you know, we know Dr. King, but we don't really know Dr. King. And we know maybe 3 speeches, you know. I have a dream. I've been to the mountaintop. And there may be another one that you may know just because. But we don't really know a lot of his words. And then it occurred to me, even in doing the research, I read all of his speeches. I got a chance to listen to so many of his speeches and sermons at the King Center. And they were really very generous. They were really very generous to allow me to have access to the archives. And then what I realized was we don't really know the times to really even appreciate his words as much as we should. Like we, I guess as African-American community and America in general, we juxtapose him to MLK as if they were living in a different time. You know,
Right.
as
Yeah.
if MLK and Malcolm X were like in these alternate universes, and only Malcolm X was the one who was really in danger for what he said. And it's like, no, Dr. King was he was in danger too, as we tend to forget. And so that is what really got the ball rolling again. Like, okay, you know what? Let me begin to research more about Jim Crow, because that's the linchpin, you know, to one, bridge generations together.
Yeah.
Because anybody over 70 grew up during Jim Crow. If someone is over 70, their formative years from 1 to 20 were spent during Jim Crow, pretty much anywhere in the country. Because even though some places didn't have legal Jim Crow, structurally, they were still Jim Crow. You know, black folks on this side of tracks, white folks on that side. If you were below the Mason-Dixon line, it was legal Jim Crow. So, you know, bringing these things together. So it just grew in me to the point where I've gotten to today with the project.
Do you think that the Jim Crow segregation era still has a current effect on our community, our Black community today?
Absolutely. It impacts really all aspects of our lives. And I'll give you a good example. Right now, we're going through, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. And what we're seeing, we're pushing up against, again, is this issue of police brutality. Well, this ability to police individuals without any concern or repercussion stems back even into that mentality, at least stems back, going back through Jim Crow, where there was no concern for how you dealt with Black bodies. And so there was a period of years, I think it was over 90 years, where a white man was not convicted of sexually abusing Black women in this country. So we could talk about from the end of slavery up until I believe I think it was in the 1960s, that they could pretty much do what they wanted to do without any retribution. You could also kill an African American. And this is just the general population. This is even you know, the police. This is just general population. You could more or less kill an African American, especially below the Mason-Dixon line, and know that there would not be a jury that could be convened that would convict you of that crime. And so the lack of respect for Black bodies is something that we still deal with today. This idea of how you should act and interact with people, racial etiquette. And so you have all of these stereotypes that have been attached to African Americans on how you should act, how you should interact, how you should respond. And if you don't, then something is wrong with you. If you're an African American woman and you show confidence and you are assertive, then they label you the angry Black woman, which is based on the Sapphire caricature. If you're a Black woman and you're tall in stature, or if you're a dark skinned and tall in stature, God forbid, then the presumption is then you must be a Mammy. You must know how to cook, because all big dark skinned Black women know how to cook. And therefore you need to be presenting yourself in a soft, docile, deferential way, because that's what I expect to see when I see a big, tall, dark skinned Black woman. Same with Black men, these caricatures of the brute, you know. Be careful of Black men, because all they want to do is sleep with white women and steal your stuff and beat you up, and they're so violent and they're so aggressive. Or they're the opposite. You know, they're the coon caricature. They're slow, you know, nim-witted. You know, all they want to do is be lazy and they don't want to work hard. So these caricatures, you know, they began in earnest during Jim Crow. Some began towards the end of slavery, or some began in slavery, some came after slavery as a resistance to free Blacks. But those caricatures still live today, and they resonate in our community, because if you look at how people responded to the Aunt Jemima trademark being removed from the pancake box, some people were happy. We were like, dang, we've been trying to get it off the box for like 139 years, you know, from day one.
Right.
And then you had this other, which was kind of crazy. It shows you how people can be manipulated through social media. You had this counter argument. You canceling culture and blah, blah. And they had all of these feel good feelings of Mammy bringing the pancakes into the kitchen. And, you know, when I open that box, I've got my own Mammy making my pancakes for me every morning, you know. But it's like, no, that's offensive to us, you know, because that's not what it was like for Black women who were enslaved and worked in kitchens. You know, it's not what it was like for women who worked as domestics after slavery and during Jim Crow. But it was about reminding people of their place. You know, Black women will put you on the box to remind you that your place is in the kitchen cooking for us, you know, and they would also sometimes conflate these stories. Like Nancy Green, the woman who everyone was quote unquote fighting to not get canceled. She didn't make up the pancake recipe. Like it was made up. They just hired her to be a living. She was the first living trademark, the first person who actually went out and marketed a product who was the actual trademark on a product in the country. She was paid a regular, probably stipend, you know, back in those days. They weren't going to pay her a lavish amount like you would an endorsement deal. And she worked and she flipped probably millions of pancakes in her lifetime. She didn't get any royalties from it. She was an employee. So, yeah, so those things linger and we carry that baggage, you know, every day of how we choose to interact. If you're a big Black dude, you may try to soften how you come across so that you don't come across as being threatening. You know, if you're a sister and you're confident, you may say, okay, I need to be assertive here, but I don't want to be the angry Black woman in this meeting, even though this person just disrespected the mess out of me. And I really need to let them know that's not going to happen. And so we spend our lives making white people comfortable instead of being able to be comfortable living in our own.
Just on any approach that you have, you think about how you approach. You're not necessarily being yourself. So I have a question about the Black community in churches. You know, it seems that the Black community, we revolve around the church. So in almost everything. And I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think the churches have changed? I mean, do you think that's a good thing that they base everything around the church?
I think that the church plays an important role. I believe that, you know, and I'm a licensed minister in the AME church. And so I have a certain perspective on it, but I do think that the church receives too much pressure to be everything. And I think sometimes, because historically when people would move during the Great Migration, they would come from the South to the North. Some people, their first stop would be go to so-and-so church because Benny and Susie, Miss Susie, they moved up to New York and that's the church they go to. And they're going to make sure that you get situated. And it was an important way station during the Great Migration. And so churches had to sort of stand in the gap for what the community was doing to all these people who were moving up from the South. It was also a communal space. It was also a space of spiritual restoration, but they also met people's very basic needs. I think the problem is that we expect the church to be everything in the community. And sometimes the church is afraid to say, I can't do that. You know, and sometimes you gotta say we can help provide meals for those experiencing homelessness, but we can't also, given our size, have a daycare center and also have job training and also have a clothing closet and also have a food pantry. Like we expect it to do everything, and what happens is the community, like the communal organizations and even the civic organizations, they sometimes get let off the hook. And where society and where quote unquote capitalistic business falls short, they just wash their hands with it and say, hey, you know, we're not going to pay you a living wage. We know we know what we're paying you could never meet your needs. And then people turn to the church and say, well, church, can you fill in the gap from where I'm making $7 an hour, but I need 2 jobs. And even with that, and my significant other working, we can barely make rent. But why is this church not doing more? It's like, because the church only got 50 people, you know, but like they don't want to hear that, you know, or if it's a church, it's doing a lot, but it could never do enough for everybody. And so it's a difficult challenge. I will say this. I do think that more churches can make that an emphasis in picking a thing or two things, or okay, this is what I know we can do. Because during the prosperity gospel era, churches got away from that. They got away from being the church that serves the people, and they went to become churches where if you name it and claim it, you come here and God's going to bless you, pouring down more blessings than you could ever receive. And it went from being a communal relationship to being a very individualistic relationship. And that's not what the church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the ecclesia, the people, communal together, as opposed to I'm gonna go get mine, and then when church is over, I'm gonna leave, and then I'll be back on Sunday. No, it's like be God's hands and God's feet and serve the people. So I think the Black church, has gone through these time periods where you kind of go, way and swaying. And I think right now, given where we are, more churches are repositioning themselves to be what the communities need. And that's where I think we're going. And it feels like that. I see more churches having food banks. I see more churches have clothing closets. I see more churches helping people experiencing homelessness. So I think there's a shift, but I just think that we need to measure it in a way that's realistic. Because I do think sometimes we really expect the church to be Jesus Christ incarnate, in that I'm just going to touch the bread and we're going to feed 5,000. And it's like, Jesus did that. We're going to do the best we can with what we got. And when we can't, we'll help. But yeah. So that's what I think. I think it's still an important voice. I think for a season it lost its voice. I'm
sorry, go ahead.
No, I just say I think for a season the church lost its voice in some sections, in some sectors. Not all churches have lost their voice, but I think some had, and I think the church allowed itself to be painted in a particular way that wasn't true to the majority of the churches. And media spent so much attention on mega churches that it forgot that 90-something% of the churches are not mega churches who are out trying to do good work every day.
Do you think because of some of what you've discussed as in the pressures and when the assumption of what's been placed upon a church by its community, that's why it's somewhat become more of also a business, trying to still be, helpful to the community, be there for a community, but now you kind of see it as it's also a business. You have to structure yourself as a business.
Yeah. And I think that model, I guess in the 80s, a lot of churches began to shift to having the community development corporation arm that they would add to it. Right. And then they would have the daycare and then the school. And you can become lost in pursuing that, and then that can become the end as opposed to the service that you're providing. And so I think it takes a good balance between the two of saying, okay, we have this piece. It does help us not have to depend on giving as much because we have income coming in from other ways. And now we're not beholden to people saying, well, you know what? I don't like that you did that. I'm not going to give. Now you're like, oh, dang, how are we going to do work? People stop giving. They mad.
Right.
They mad. We want to serve those experiencing homelessness, but they don't want us to. And so you have to find ways to do it. But I think that sometimes people can become attracted to that part of it only, or not only, primarily, and not the spiritual growth and development of the people in the pews. Right. And so you really have to always be discerning. Okay, well, as a pastor, what is drawing me to ministry? Is it really I just want to do business? Right. And if that is, then maybe I should be the head pastor. Maybe I'll be an associate minister, and that's what I work on. But somebody has to be responsible for the spiritual development of the people. Right. So you need to balance it. And I think sometimes it can be a challenge, and some churches can go the other way and just be focused on, strip malls and commercial strips and senior housing and that side, and forget the other side.
So in the current time right now, of course, it's real tumultuous right now, and a big issue or concern is like these Confederate monuments and statues, and what's your take on that? What do you think about that?
On our podcast, Creative Tension, we did 2 episodes on Confederate monuments, and I really had to do a lot of research on them because while I'm in the South, I'm in Atlanta, and we have quite a few monuments in this area. And so in doing the research, I realized that, okay, first of all, the overwhelming majority weren't built right after the Civil War. In fact, they were built in certain spurts of time for the purpose really of reframing what the Civil War was about, which is called the lost cause, the lost cause theory or the lost cause movement, which was to say it was states' rights and not slavery. So that was a strategy because they lost on the idea of slavery. And so they wanted to say, well, it really wasn't about slavery. It really was about states' rights. But if you read the secession documents from all the states, when all those states seceded from the United States, in their secession notes from those conventions, they all said it's about slavery. I mean, it's not like they were hiding it when they seceded, but it's sort of like revisionist history of like, oh, well, that's not really why. But if you read when they left, they all said, we want the right to keep owning these slaves. And so monuments were built by the Daughters of the Confederacy. Like I said, normally, during the time after Reconstruction, many were built. Then they were also built in spurts. The Atlanta race riots around that time, they were built. They were built also at the end of wars. So World War I, World War II, and then the rest were built after around the time of Brown v. Board and into the Civil Rights Movement. And so the monument's purpose is really intimidation of African Americans to remind them of the old way. That's why they were built. They weren't built per se to honor, quote unquote, those who fought on the Confederate side. The Daughters of the Confederacy were no joke. They were a fundraising machine. And when it was time, and they put them all over this country, and the overwhelming majority were funded by them. So I think they should come down out of public spaces. I think they should go in museums, or I think they should go in areas where you can study them. But to keep them up in places of honor, I think is not the appropriate way to do it, because one, the Confederacy only lasted really more or less 4 years. And so why do we have all these monuments to an entity that tried to secede from the country, which basically made them traitors? And it only lasted 4 years. I can see if there was like 120 years of the Confederacy and they built these monuments while the time in which they existed and they reigned, or even if they had built them, even I still wouldn't agree, if they had been built during the time of the war itself, when the Confederacy actually existed, then you might say, well, but they weren't. They were an afterthought to reframe and reshape American history. And so to me, yeah, they have to go. Put them in museums. If and especially like a place like Richmond has a gazillion of them. And so you want to also be careful of not creating parks, because they have so many. They could almost create a park of just Confederate monuments. And then what does that really look like? They also have already Confederate museums. So it's touchy, but I just feel that we shouldn't be celebrating people who wanted to keep other people enslaved. To me, that's just insane. They pulled away from the country, and then these monuments were only built as a way to basically have terror against African Americans, because most were built in public places, a lot of times by the courthouse, a lot of times leading to the courthouse, a lot of times in parks, as a way of saying, we don't want you in this park. This park is not for you. It's a segregated park. We don't want you in the park. We're going to put this Confederate statue here to remind you that you're not welcome here. So they're all really monuments of exclusion, really. So
this is just something that's, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, what I'm going to say. But, obviously, as we know, African Americans were brought here by force, but they were spread about, different parts, of the globe. So to me personally, it just sometimes seems that African Americans don't want to say they're Black. And why I say that is because if you ask someone where they're from or whatever, they say, I'm Haitian or I'm Jamaican. And I mean no offense to anybody, but I don't know what that is. And so, and I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. It's almost like people don't want to just say I'm Black anymore. So
that's a sticky one.
Because it bothers me. What are your thoughts on? And I say why it bothers me personally is I'm biracial. We all come in different shades, and so when I have said to people, they'll say, "Oh, what are you?" I say, "Oh, I'm Black," and I'll say, "Oh, but what are?" No, but you're something else, and and it can sometimes be offensive. So, but then also my counterparts, when I talk to them, I've heard people just talking, and they'll say, "Oh, I've even heard Australian," and I'm like, "Well, you were raised there, but I don't know if you're Australian, but I don't want to be the one, I don't want to start an argument because they were brought up in Australia." Are you getting what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. I would say, I get that sometimes people, they want to say Black. But they want to represent the heritage of where their ancestors are from. And so I get that. For a while I would kind of struggle with, as an African American, my family's born and raised here. My ancestors are from here, at least to a point. And we believe we have an idea of where others came from. But I understand this notion of representing the place of your ancestors. And I think that is a part of it. Yes, I think sometimes, depending on how the person says it, it's like, "Oh no, I'm not y'all." And so I think that's what I'm getting from you in that whole, when they say it, sometimes it's like, "Oh no, I'm not African American, or I'm not Black," because Black means then I'm just like y'all. No, I know where my people from. I'm Haitian American, I'm Jamaican American, I'm Trini American, and I think that I think it goes to, and it goes in some ways, it goes to some stereotypes in some ways in which people are conditioned to view the African American experience. And so sometimes they will say, and I've had friends that I talk to, people who grew up in Jamaica in particular, because I'm from Brooklyn. And so I know a lot of people who are Jamaican, and they were like, their families were like, "Yo, when we get over, do not hang out with African Americans," because they had all of these stereotypes that had been pumped into their mind about African Americans. They're not going to necessarily work hard. They're going to be shucking and jiving, because this is back when Good Times was out. I watch Good Times. They're like, "I watch Good Times. I know how they do. You don't want to be like them."
Yeah.
And so there was this perception of we have to stay close knit so that we can succeed here. And if we hang out with them, you're gonna mess around. They're gonna drag you down. And that's what's put out in the world. That if you hang out with African Americans, they're just lazy. They're violent. They women don't know their place. They might make you a good meal, but that's not who you want to strive with. And so I think that we do ourselves sometimes a disservice, especially now in this era of time where we have way more control. We have way more ability to control the narrative about what it means to be African American, what it means to be Black in America. And I don't know that we necessarily harness that in the way that we really could to be most effective. But I get it. I'm not gonna lie. I get why someone would say, "I'm Haitian American," or I'm Haitian. They may be first generation, and they may be like, "Nah, I'm Haitian. I grew up there. I speak patois. I know I cook that way, and so no, we don't eat fried chicken. No, I don't eat yams,
Right. Yeah.
we don't do collard greens and pig feet. No, we don't. So it's tough to yeah. But I do see your point though. I'm not, yeah. Because it should be enough. It should be diasporically, it should be enough that we could coexist. But sometimes not knowing where we fit within the diaspora, we just kind of hold on to that first location, because really for African Americans, we can't even get to the original location. We might be lucky, like my family, we believe some of our family went to Barbados, like, but that's where the trail grows cold for us, and some Native Americans, like most folks in the Low Country, that happened as well.
So let's talk about our prior president, who's still my president, Obama.
Yes.
Our first Black president, and I hope not to be our only. But obviously, I think he opened the door for I say for everyone to see that now we could possibly have women and Asians and people of other races in office in that position. But I hear, I'm sure you've heard a lot also in the Black community, and or even in our counterpart community, that what did he do for the Black community? As if he was supposed to come in, turn the tables, give everybody land and a mule. And I'm just exaggerating, but when he's there for the people in general. So I don't know, hopefully you want to answer that. What are your thoughts on Obama and, when you hear those things? Did you get it? It's a touchy question. It's a touchy subject. Hold on, you guys. He's froze up just for a minute. So hang on until he comes back in so we can get that question answered. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, for listening on all of the platforms that you are on. If you're on one of our 13 podcast platforms that you're listening on, iHeartRadio, Amazon Alexa, iTunes, wherever you're listening, or maybe you're watching live on YouTube or on Facebook, you can always join in and ask a question from Mr. Elliott Robinson. Oh, he is back. There he is. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I hope he's not avoiding me.
No.
Okay.
Okay. So with President Obama, I think one of the issues that we had, and that I think one thing that we forget, is that when he was elected, he had a supermajority. And so basically he was able to push forward some of his policies in a way that allowed us to get an idea of what he wanted to do. And then when Senator Kennedy died, that was that. And then the Republicans were emboldened at the midterm, and Mitch McConnell famously said, we're not letting him do anything until he gets out of office. And they pretty much held true to that. They made it very difficult for him to pass a lot of things. Having said that, so we'll never know really, other than what he did through executive order, which unfortunately, as we see now, executive order is just that. The next president can come and basically rip that order up and override it, which is why you want to have laws passed, because it's just more difficult to overturn. So I don't think we could ever fully grasp what it would have been like, but I do feel that there were some areas in which he could have done more to maybe speak up or to be supportive. And I think sometimes people felt that he wasn't as outspoken on certain issues, and that he walked the line maybe too much. And so, there's a segment of community that says, that he could have done more to be an ally, to be supportive. But sometimes too, we have to remember, as we see with the current administration, it's not just the president, but it's also who else is on the team.
Right.
So it's on the appetite that they allow to grow, to be able to do some of these things. So there may have been more things that he may have been willing or would have liked to have pushed forward, but they said, well, maybe you want to wait, or maybe you want to hold off, or And then there were just some things that were just wrong, like Arnie Duncan Department of Education, when they made it super difficult for students to get loans. And then the parents had to have great credit in order for you to qualify. And they basically ignored the Black college presidents who came and said, this is a bad idea. This is going to kill us. And it's going to hurt African-American students and poor students and students of color more than anybody else. And they did it anyway. So I think in instances like that, people will say his administration could be tone deaf and a little economically aloof, with some things. But that's the nature of the business, because who's sitting in those positions? There are people who may not really understand what happens in the real world, because economically, they haven't been in the real world. Socially, they haven't been in the real world in decades. And so that's just a fact. And so it's the president, excuse me, and then it's also his cabinet and where his cabinet sits and how much are they willing to push for the things that we view to be important.
So I want to touch on the media. So, I think the media plays a big part in how we respond as a people. And I think my personal opinion is they know what to put out there and how they anticipate us to respond. So, and maybe people don't think the same thing, but specifically for our community. What do you think about how the whole Black movement, I don't know, this could be a fad right now, but what's happening in all of it's great how everybody's communing and getting together, but how they depict Black people in the media. And I'm not talking about movies or TV. I'm saying things like in what the news puts out there, because I think it's a lot about the news and on how they depict us and how to get us kind of excited or irrational.
I would say it's funny. When I was young, and I grew up as a kid. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And so one day I might have been 7 or 8 years old. And I can't remember if it was my mom or my dad. They said, hey, what'd you notice about that news story? I said, I don't know. He said, if you notice, it's probably my dad now that I'm playing it back in my head.
Right.
If you notice, they said that the suspect is Black. He said, but if you notice, whenever the suspect is white, they never say the suspect is white. They just say he's a suspect.
Oh, right. Correct. Right.
And I thought about it and I said, and so literally from that, it just stuck with me. And for my whole, I've watched that, and it really is a thing. And there have only been a few markets that I've been in where I've watched TV, watched the news, where they actually say a white suspect, age 20. And one of them is surprisingly Charleston, South Carolina. For whatever reason, that market is one of the only markets that I've been in where they describe the say ethnicity. It's not really ethnicity, but the description of an individual based on either Black or white or Latino. Right. And so their role is gigantic. And they realize, I think they overestimate sometimes, or they up their role and they underestimate the will of the people. And sometimes they try to catch up. The problem is that when they catch up, the people don't adjust. And so, for example, like with Black Lives Matter, the media was a little late getting on board because they wanted to tell the story their way. They wanted to tell the riot looting story. And the people were saying, no. I don't know who's doing that, but it's not us. Right. And we will continue to put out that there's some other folks out here doing this stuff that they don't look like us. And they seem to look like some may have some law enforcement background, and some may have some military background, and some actually look like some good old boys. So I don't know what's going on, but I know they're not here for George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or for Ahmaud Arbery. And so it's morphing and evolving as a people to understand that they're always manipulating because their interest is very narrow, and they are built on the caricature. And they know, and what I think they were anticipating is if we can get a little bit of looting in Minneapolis, we could stop this whole thing because they know sociopsychology, and they know the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about it. If you can initiate a certain behavior, people will follow that behavior. It'll get to the tipping point.
Yeah.
And so all these protests, you see these people trying to egg folks on to get to this tipping point. The problem was social media. People were like, where did this pallet of bricks come from? Why are these guys over here burning these crates? Who are these guys? Why are they putting these burnt crates in the shopping cart? Where did they come from? And so it's like, do we continue to let them manipulate us and paint us into a corner? Or do we expose what we see and then stay consistent about what it is and then speak about what we're talking about? And then another example of that is the whole defund the police movement. It's like, my first thought was, y'all couldn't thought of a better name than that? Like, dang, y'all doing some heavy lifting because, and that's another thing where it's like, I bet that the people who are using that didn't even come up with that. I bet the folks on the other side came up with it because it's such a negative term that it would immediately turn people off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what they didn't expect, I think, were people to say, no, we're going to take the time to explain what we mean. And because we have social media, because we have these other outlets, we're going to really be very specific in what we're talking about. And you won't get to tell us what it is that we're looking to do. But I do believe when I first heard, I'm like, oh, that's from the right side. Like they came up with that and they'll throw it out and people will run and grab it and not think that's not a good name. Pick a different name. Yeah. So
I want to share a little bit about some projects you have going on. If you don't mind, I want to kind of get your, so people can, be more connected. And because I love this. And actually how you actually started this, because I mean, I did listen to a few of the podcasts. Your blogs are great, but it's just the information here, the photos. My brother says, we think he looks like Thurgood Marshall. But so let's talk about what you have going on and your projects and how our community can help get involved. What recommendations you would have?
One I would say is definitely listen to the podcast, because the podcast is really the information center. It's the way in which we begin to tell the stories. And, my goal is that we're telling stories that American history class has forgotten to share with you. And our podcast is available on every platform you can think of. And so you can listen to it anywhere and everywhere. You can also listen to it on the website. We try to never go over an hour. Try to just keep in mind to keep it tight, but we've covered a myriad of topics. It's funny. We started in 2017, really before people were really hungry for Jim Crow. They were like, why would you do a podcast on Jim Crow? I'm tired of Jim Crow. But really, God spoke to me and was like, you need to do this. This desire to tell these stories has lasted since like the mid 90s. Mm-hmm. And so I realized if I don't tell them, then I'll know that there's something I was supposed to do in this life that I just did not do. And I would definitely have been able to say, not tell these stories. And so that's really what the goal of the podcast is. Creative Tension is about, and the name comes from Dr. King, which he coined this term of creative tension. Is how do you go up against systems of oppression? How do you stand up against an organization, a group, a system that is so much more powerful than you, that you have to create tension? And the tension can't just always be a physical tension of a physical confrontation, but that you have to be creative in the tension. And so whether for them it was sit-ins, whether it was marching and protesting, whether it was boycotting, they were looking at ways to create tension that would force the other party to have to come to the table. And so our goal is really to be able to give a voice to people in periods of struggle forgotten by history, because there are lessons that we can take away that are applicable today. And I think a lot of times there is this disconnect between the past and the present. There's a disconnect because there is PTSD from people who are Jim Crow survivors, who cannot see themselves bringing up these stories again. Right. And I think for many, when I try to really talk to get to interview, it's a challenge. It's a challenge because they want to put the past in the past. But if we don't tell those stories, then they pass away with them. And you have others who are using old methods and strategies from that time, and they're trying to reintroduce it today. And so we need those stories, one, to fill a cultural gap that we have generationally. When you have people wearing shirts like "I'm not my ancestors," I'm like, no, you're not, because you live in a free society where you can walk around, you're not stepping off the curb, but there's this disrespect of our ancestors because we can't fully grasp and appreciate what they've been through. And so the goal of the podcast is to tell those stories, is to help people say, whoa, oh man, okay, I didn't realize that. And the blessing is we do have archival audio from the John Hope Franklin Center at Duke University, from their Behind the Veil Oral History Project, where they interviewed over 1,200 Jim Crow survivors. And it's an amazing archive. They don't have that many on their website. They do have over 400 though on their website, and you can go at any time. Most of them have transcripts so that you can look at the transcript, but you can listen to what their lives were like, what they went through. The audio quality is pretty good for the overwhelming majority of the episodes. And you can just hear their voices and they can talk to you. And so we use some of those also for our podcast episodes, and they really help add weight to it. But again, our goal is really to tell those stories because we don't get them. We don't share. We don't tell each other, let's remember. We want to forget Jim Crow. Whereas in comparison, if you are Jewish brothers and sisters, they say we will not forget the Holocaust.
Right.
And so they share those stories. They talk about what happened. You can't go a movie season without at least 4 movies that are based in World War II, where the Holocaust is some part of that movie storyline. And whereas for African Americans, we're like, we don't want I don't want another slavery film. It's like we've only had maybe 15 in the history of cinema. But every time there's one, we just go crazy. Another slave movie. There've been like 4 maybe, that have been worth anything. But that's our response because we just want to forget, as opposed to remembering, and then remembering in a way that's healthy and cathartic for us, so that we can have honor and respect. And so that's another part of what we want to do, is give them a place to speak, and then give us a place to listen and to learn and to garner more respect. And so the podcast has been good. We're in our 3rd season now. We took a little mid-season break. This is our 3rd season. We've only done limited run episodes. We'll do about 12 episodes per season. This season, we'll also probably do about 12 episodes. And then we're going to get started again with our new episodes.
So would you say that, we all obviously know that it's a lack of education with us as in the African-American community, not working as together in a community as we could, because we really don't know our ancestry history, and everything is basically from stories and taking stories from our ancestors. And maybe we're losing that connection of having those stories and understanding, and that's one of our major struggles.
I would say yes, because I tell people all the time, I was born in 1969. So basically at the end of Jim Crow is when I was born. And so I'm in that generation where they wanted to move forward. They wanted to put the past behind them. They wanted to pursue new opportunities that were being made more readily available. And so they left those stories behind. They left some of those struggles behind. They left some of those things that are integral, because we are a society or a culture. We are a culture as African Americans. It's called honor and shame. We're an honor and shame culture. And so everything is about, how do you honor the family, or are you shaming the family?
Right.
And it's a big thing. And we view that as a shame, unfortunately, as opposed to, and understandably so. But I think we should also lift up the honor of how we survived, and lift up the honor in how we achieved, and lift up the honor in how we persevered, and not just the shame of the system that it had to occur in. And I think too often the shame of of what they had to endure has also been elevated in a way that makes us ashamed of them because they haven't told their stories. And so we get this weight on us as the offspring and the great offspring and the grand offspring of Jim Crow survivors, but we don't get a chance to have it in proper perspective. And so because they don't talk about it, and the books that we read in school and what we learn in school, they gloss over it, or they make us very uncomfortable when they teach about it, that we just want to get past it. And I think that more of that needs to be shared because there's freedom in that. And I think there's strength in that if we are willing to go through the process. But we have to create a space for our elders to be able to do it. And then as youth and younger people, we have to have some humility in just asking them, what was it like? What was it like growing up? And maybe as the children of Jim Crow survivors, they may not want to tell us, but they're going to tell them grandchildren. Or they're going to tell that great niece or that great nephew, because as they often say, old people are just folks trying to get into heaven. And so they're going to do what they can to get into heaven. So if grandbaby asks, they're going to say, okay, well, let me tell you, I could ask 80 times. It was all right, but again, also letting them know we want to hear what you have to say. And I got that from a few people too. Like, I didn't think anybody would want to know what it was like. Or I didn't realize anybody cared. I talked to a lady. I ran into a grocery store was 2 days ago, and her grandson is a student at FAMU, and he had a project, and so part of the project was calling her and talking, and he had to interview her for this class, and she was so blown away that he wanted to know about what it was like for her growing up, and how touched he was, and how emotional he was. And then how emotional she was in sharing. And so it was just like, yeah, this is a incredibly important missing piece that we're just not, as a community, we haven't really been able to really get past and get through.
So do you think that, I think that we should have, I know they have Black History Month in school, but there really isn't a curriculum to where you can educate like that. Should be part of the everyday curriculum in schools.
And it should just be weaved into what they do. And so now you have more schools talking about, well, what do we do and how do we do it? And I sit sometimes and I just say, include everybody. But they only are going to get what the textbooks give them. And so teachers have to do the extra work. And where do I go? And what's crazy is sometimes they don't even know that there are books about Black inventors, that there are books about Black scientists, that there are books about Black teachers, because within the field of education and educating educators, they don't use that material because certain states dictate basically what go into textbooks. Right. The biggest ones being in California because they buy the most. And so whatever their curriculum is has a great influence on on what's in the textbooks. And I think that we have to push back against that because we know that now Texas educationally has become super duper conservative in terms of their Department of Education and what they're willing to allow to be taught. They're even going away from calling slavery, calling it indentured servitude. So, or calling individuals who've been enslaved workers. So we've got to really push back against that. And I think that it's about going out and seeking these tools and then going back to the school systems and say, hey, look, this is a book that I found. I would like to see that you incorporate, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has a great book on inventors. I forgot the name. It's The Color of My World. Excellent book. People I've never heard of, but there are many books like that are very accessible that a teacher could take a couple inventors and just incorporate them in because that's where they should be. The problem is we focus on a few folk, and if we do focus on Black folk, it's going to be you have Harriet Tubman, obviously going to have Dr. King, you're going to have Carter G. Woodson. Those are probably the big three. Yeah, those are probably the big three that you're going to get. Anybody else is gravy, pretty much. And so I think that it's going to take a concerted effort of us going to school systems saying, no, it's not acceptable. We need to have everybody. This person did this, this, and this. Why aren't our kids learning about them?
Right.
But then that comes on us to know about them so that we can go up to the school and check the school. And I think that there needs to be a renaissance towards Black history and Black education within the households.
Yeah.
And then from there, we can go out and emanate. And right now there's a renaissance in excellent Black literature. Just tons and tons of excellent scholarship that's accessible. That's not so highly academic that you're just like, like I can't, it's too deep, it's too dense.
Yeah.
But books that are being written for general consumption that can educate and teach.
So before we end our show, we could actually go on for a long time. So before we end our show, because I know our time's getting close, I wanted to ask you if there is anything that you could share with our youth that you would advise and ways they can be more a part of the community and helping, and what recommendations would you make, organizations they could join, and maybe they're on their way to college, courses or that they could possibly look into, studies that they could take that really are going to help us in our particular community, just educating themselves.
I would definitely say for a student that's going to college, absolutely take Black history courses. It doesn't matter what your major is. It doesn't matter what you want to do long term. You're always going to have electives, but you have to be able to ground yourself in your own history and not be ashamed of it. And I think too often we've been led to be ashamed of our history because of oppression, because of violence, because of racial terror, because of chattel slavery. But at the end of the day, they were people who survived. And so we are from a stock of people who survived and who were still able to flourish in the midst of. And so it's important to learn about those individuals. I would also say, if you're going to college, use the resources. Universities have unfathomable resources at your available to research and to look up information. And so use that to your advantage, because once you graduate, your student ID will generally not get you the full catalog of resources available. You'll have some stuff you can still get online through the university library,
right.
But you will not have it all. And so use that as an opportunity to really broaden your mindset and broaden your horizons. I would say, in terms of being active and involved, always feel that whatever field that it is that you have an interest in, always join the organization for that field that it was created for African Americans. And the reason why is because no one is going to look out for you better than your own. And I think all too often we may shun, or we may treat that as a secondary organization. Right. So for example, like a journalist, like they go to NABJ, and so they may join the other majority journalist organizations, but I don't know if I want to join NABJ. I mean, you have to. Like, why wouldn't you? It's kind of like being an attorney. You would join American Bar Association, but you've got to join the National Bar Association. Like, what are you thinking? Like, why wouldn't you? And so being open to those opportunities, if someone is younger, and really for everyone, there are a ton of podcasts out there that are not just Creative Tension, although I do recommend Creative Tension. It's a great podcast. But there are other podcasts out there too that are very accessible, like 1619. You have Code Switch. Another one that I like is Southern Hollows, is a good podcast as well. A lot of people like Air Hustle. So there are a ton. And I have a blog post about the podcast that I really enjoy a lot. So you can see that on the website as well. But that's an accessible way to get information, to get some history. And what will generally happen is you'll be listening to an episode. There'll be a guest on, or there'll be a topic, and you'll say, oh, that person is an author. They wrote a book. Well, let me go pick that book up. Right. And that, and so I would say be a lifelong learner is another thing as well. Like, if you hear about a book, or if you're on the radio, listen to NPR is another thing that I would recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to, because it's really one of the only true still news sources that's available. That's why every year they keep trying to defund it, because they don't want people to be informed and educated. And so listen to NPR, listen to the authors. They're always going to have other, and read. You know, I think I was say just read. You know, grab some good books and read, because I had a lady tell us about raising our daughter, and I'll tell her quickly. We were like, well, what do we do? You know, she's young. We want to make sure. She said, I think she's in like 3rd or 4th grade. Just make sure she reads every day for an hour. And then we were like, I was like, that's it? You know, I was like, she's like, just make sure she reads every day for an hour. She'll be fine. I said, well, why? She said, because reading is English, social studies. Part of that also be science. She was like, that's what reading does. It opens your mind to what's possible. And as long as you're a reader, then you'll be able to continue to. And so I would just say to read a lot and read often, and read a bounty of Black authors and authors of color at all age levels now. When we were growing up, you didn't have probably a lot of Black books for little kids. You got little kids, you got young adult authors like Nick Stone and Angie Thomas and a bunch of others. So just read a lot and take it in.
So would you be if a mentor or an educational resource to our listeners, and they can get a hold of you?
Absolutely. If you just go to the website, creativetension.org, just go to the contact us page and just shoot me an email. I will respond really quickly. Within 24 hours, let me say that. I'll respond within 24 hours. But yeah, just leave a message and I will respond. One of the things that we do that I haven't put on the website yet, we're also doing implicit bias training, and we're also doing some diversity training. We've been doing that with some schools lately, both with faculty as well as with parents, because we are finding that in the home, you know, bias begins in the home.
Right.
And then also with teachers, trying to help show them areas where basically they have blind spots, or where they may not be overtly racist, but they do have bias. Another thing that we've done in the past is also going to schools with our curriculum, doing sessions on caricatures and the origin of caricatures. And then we also do a session where we talk about the Children's Crusade and showing young people the importance of activism and how these children were able to be activists. Some as young as 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, who were willing to go to jail for the right so that they could end segregation in their town. So we do that as well. So we go into the schools, and then we also provide implicit bias training, diversity training. And like everyone else now, we're doing that virtually, utilizing Zoom platform. So they can reach us at creativetension.org. Come check us out. And like I said, we have a blog, we have the podcast, but also if you need more additional services or ways to connect with me, just simply go to contact us page and shoot me a message, and I'll get back to you.
Well, you were a really great guest. I was very pleased to have you on. Too bad Shamar missed it. Sorry, Shamar, you're probably listening somewhere. So for those who have been following us forever, thank you for tuning in and always following us. And those who I see who have been watching live, because I see you up there, be sure to check our calendar on our show page, entrepreneurlife.show, for the upcoming guests. But as well as you can listen to this show on the replay all day, as well as how to get a hold of Elliott Robinson and connect with him. All his information will be there. So again, it's not Saturday. Thanks everybody for listening this Friday. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next week on our next show. Bye.
Thanks, Rose.